The freighter's bow rose like a chest hit by a giant's fist, and there was no white line in the water to warn anyone. A U.S. submarine Balao-class steel, quiet screws, men holding their breath had fired a Mark-18 electric torpedo that left no wake at all. The fish was 21 inches wide, battery-driven, carrying roughly 600 pounds of Torpex, and running near 29 knots for about 4,000 yards, deadly, silent, and impossible to spot. Lookouts were trained to find the foaming trail of steam torpedoes. The Mark-18 gave them nothing. 1 second. Blue Pacific and cargo moving to the front. The next, plates buckled, frames snapped, and men grabbed railings that were no longer there. This is where American genius met American grit. Our sailors solved a simple problem the hard way. If the enemy watches the trail, remove the trail. The torpedomen who once cursed duds now loaded electric weightless shots, checked battery temperatures, set gyro angles, and watched the periscope crosshairs float steady as a surgeon's hand. You could attack in daylight and not give yourself away. That changed the math of convoy protection, because escorts could not race up the visible lane and drop charges over the shooter. They charged to nothing. They guessed wrong. They bled time. A Japanese sailor pulled from an oil slick said it softly. We never saw the line. We thought the sea itself hit us. He wasn't wrong. The sea became American when the weapon got quiet. In Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz read patrol reports with that calm stare people remember. He knew what a silent weapon meant. Pressure every hour, any weather, any lane. Supremacy at sea, his staff reminded him, is the base of all operations. We called our boats the silent service. They earned it the honest way. A periscope cut the swells like a needle. The skipper's voice was low. Fire one. The torpedo shack hummed. No bubbles, no telltale hiss, only a stopwatch counting toward impact. When it came under the keel. A deep thud, a roar like the earth opening, and then silence again while the boat slipped away to reload. One boat, one shot, and a supply chain snapped. The men wiped condensation off the scope and marked a new target. Holy shit fact to carry forward, less than 2% of the US. Navy's people would destroy more than half of Japan's merchant fleet, and the quiet torpedo lit the fuse. In a cramped wardroom that smelled of coffee and diesel, a navigator drew 3 pencil lines from Formosa to Luzon to the South China Sea and said, "Pick one, we'll be there." That is how a tiny force became a national hammer. Submarines were under 2% of US Navy personnel, yet they sank over half of all Japanese merchant tonnage and a huge share of warships, 2 millions of tons dragged below by persistent, repeatable patrols. The numbers are cold, but they read like thunder. Convoys erased, tankers gone, routes abandoned, islands left to starve because the ocean in between belonged to Americans with stopwatches and electric fish. Every patrol had a ledger. Sailors logged bearings and ranges, but they also logged habits, where tankers hugged coasts, where escorts grew lazy at dawn, where weather covered a bold approach. Gato and Balao-class boats pushed deeper and closer. The Mark-18 let them fire by day without a signature, then punch again in the same minute. It was leverage. It was industrial arithmetic turned into waves. One boat did the work of a wing of bombers when seas were right. A dozen boats across the map strangled a nation. A POW remembered the fear that spread when a ship vanished with no warning. We were many, he said, but the ocean was theirs. This wasn't bravado. It was a factory floor in Ohio, wiring battery cells, a machinist in Connecticut truing gyros, and a torpedo man in the forward room checking brush springs. It was the grand alliance of blueprints and bravery. America made a silent weapon in bulk and gave it to skippers trained to use it without mercy and without waste. Tokyo learned the cost the hard way. Without fuel, planes don't fly. Without rice, garrisons don't stand. Without ore, factories sit quiet. Admirals looked at sailing orders and realized they had to choose which fronts to feed and which to abandon. The 2% had forced a superpower's choice. Escort doctrine that once chased bubbling trails now chased ghosts. The Mark-18 left the pursuers, red-faced and far from the shooter. Another holy shit fact to hold in your hands. A handful of boats erased sea lanes faster than anyone could redraw them. That's not luck. That's American planning, American steel, American courage, aligned and relentless. A torpedo man slapped a misfired Mark-14 inches 1,942 and called it a $5,000 fish that swam like a brick. He wasn't wrong. Early in the war, our steam torpedoes broke hearts with duds, depth errors, and faulty exploders. Question: how do you win a torpedo war when your torpedoes won't explode? Answer: American style. Admit the flaw. Test like mad. And build the electric Mark-18 with a simple, reliable contact pistol and no betraying wake. The change came fast, because a free nation can fix things fast. Technicians read gauges, swapped exploders, rewired motors, and set standard procedures you could teach to a 19-year-old from Kansas overnight. The Mark-18's battery stack hummed. Grease-stained fingers learned to baby those cells, the right temperature, the right trickle charge, the right check on brush wear, so when the skipper whispered, "Shoot," the boat didn't advertise the shot. 30 knots of quiet punishment moved out and down, right under the keel. A German sailor taken after an Atlantic fight shook his head at American speed. "Your industry changes weapons faster than we change orders," he said. Point. U.S. Yards and labs formed a loop. Field complaint on Monday, modification on Friday. Boats loading new gear the next patrol. Bureaucracy exists everywhere, but ours bent to results when lives were at stake. That cultural edge, humility, plus engineering, plus urgency became a combat edge. Escorts trained to see tracks still leaned on old reflex. They charged wakes that weren't there. They threw patterns wide of the mark. Meanwhile, American skippers learned to stack advantages, shoot wakeless by day, reload fast, use radar under cloud, fire again in the narrowest water. Every solved problem compounded another. By late 1943 and 1944, the silent service wasn't just brave, it was technically overwhelming. Remember this beat as we move forward. Innovation is a weapon. When sailors can trust their torpedoes, they can take harder shots, closer angles, riskier daylight setups. Men who once cursed steel now counted seconds to impact and smiled when the hull lifted. Fix the unfixable. And suddenly the impossible daylight ambushes in busy shipping lanes became the new normal. Richard Hetherington O'Kane stood at the periscope of USS Tang with a stopwatch in his palm and a hunter's quiet in his chest. He took bearings, checked zig patterns, and chose to shoot so close you could almost feel the convoy's bow waves touching the scope shears. Electric torpedoes made that courage sensible. No trail meant no tattletale line for escorts to race. Fire 1, fire 2. Then keep the scope up, because nothing in the water points back to you. The first ship took a clean underkeel hit. The second broke her spine. O'Kane's men were not magicians. They were experts. They knew gyro angles, spread patterns, and the way a merchant captain hesitates when the first blast hits. The Mark-18 let Tang fire in daylight and hold position for follow-ups without moving far or fast. The escorts charged the wrong patch of sea, blind to a wake that didn't exist. Tang stayed, cool, used seconds like coins, and bought another sinking. A Taiwanese deckhand pulled from the water later said, "There was no line in the sea, only a boom that folded steel like paper." That sentence carries the whole war in it. Enemies were brave, they were trained. But they were taught to look for a signature that American technology had erased. Our boats still took mortal risks. Tang herself would be lost to a circular running torpedo at the end, but on patrol after patrol, O'Kane proved what a calm mind and a silent weapon can do together. This is the American formula at human scale. Skill plus tool equals shock. The kid in the torpedo room cared for batteries like a farmer cares for roots. The chief of the boat timed reload drills until muscle memory shaved minutes. The skipper treated seconds like gold. When you stack that across a fleet, you get an empire's supply lines blinking off like lights at closing time. Carry this forward into even bolder deeds. If O'Kane could walk a daylight attack right into the convoy's teeth, what happens when an American captain decides that even a safe harbor is just another target-rich environment? The answer comes at night, at flank speed, with columns of water climbing skyward. Eugene B. Fluckey took USS Barb, where the enemy felt safe inside a crowded harbor on a black January night in 1945. Namquan Harbor belonged to the other side on the map. It belonged to Barb for that 1 hour of furious life. Fluckey charged in, lined up targets stacked like dominoes, and fired a storm of shots. The electric fish ran true without wakes, so even in the brief confusion after the first blasts, no one could draw a line back to the shooter. Water leapt higher than masts, engines screamed. Barb was already twisting for the exit at flank. This was not luck. It was American daring mated to American hardware. A wakeless torpedo turns an anchorage into a shooting gallery because the first seconds decide everything. Escorts cannot run up the line when no line exists. Mines and nets help, but they don't help enough when your opponent believes the only safe place in a war zone is under open sky and far from white trails. Barb proved safety was a story the enemy told itself to sleep. A Soviet POW later freed, after transport chaos remembered that night kind of moment. The sea roared, and then there was air where a deck used to be. Another man on the pier shouted about ghost fish. Ghost is right. The technological advantage had a psychological twin. Panic steals judgment. Confusion wastes minutes. Minutes give American captains everything they need. Fluckey's crew also did the impossible on land in 1945, sneaking ashore to blow a train, but the harbour raid shows the essence. Initiative. The Mark-18 did not give courage. It rewarded it. It made risk pay in larger, louder ways. Each sinking in tight water shocked planners who thought geography would protect them. Geography failed. Physics won. Silent shots under the keel do not respect a nation's map. Here's the bridge to the bigger picture. When even your safe places are targets, the death of supply is not a theory. It's a schedule, and American submarines kept the schedule like factory whistles: next lane, next convoy, next harbor. A Tokyo staff officer pushed beads on a soroban and found a number he didn't say out loud: 3 months. Question: how do you feed far-flung garrisons when every sea lane bleeds ships faster than you can replace them? The answer arrived with a dull thud under thousands of keels. U.S. submarines using electric torpedoes by day, radar and training by night, until the math turned fatal. Tankers vanished. Rice convoys disappeared. Ore and rubber stalled. The front didn't collapse in a single battle. It starved in a calendar. American patrols were relentless. Intelligence mapped the choke points. Boats rotated through them like skilled machinists on a line. The Mark-18's silence meant daytime shots didn't blow the hunters' cover. Crews could stay in the pocket and hit again. That's how a small community of sailors forced big choices. Feed Burma or feed New Guinea? Fuel carriers or fuel trucks? When everything is short, picking wrong today means defeat next month. An American radio man taken prisoner after his boat was lost scribbled a note on scrap. If we go down, someone else stands the watch. The line holds. He was right. 52 U.S. submarines never came home, our highest casualty rate, but patrol tempo did not break. That is the measure of a free nation at war. Individuals fall, The mission stands. Enemies respected this. They also feared it. Reports spoke of invisible attackers and no trails. That's not legend. That's batteries charged to spec and contact pistols that worked. The enemy's shock hardened into resignation. Convoy tables were red ink and wishful thinking. A general can order courage, he cannot order fuel. A captain can demand loyalty, he cannot make rice appear by decree. The ocean belongs to the side that controls movement, and by 1944 the United States controlled movement under the surface. The 90-day panic became a 90-week grind toward empty tanks and empty bowls. Hold this in your mind as we step into the wide-angle view. Leadership, in Pearl, factories at home, and sailors at sea made one machine. Statistics that seem impossible are just the echoes of that machine working perfectly. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz read submarine patrol reports the way a surgeon reads vital signs, calm, exact, and ready to act. He directed the silent hammer from Pearl Harbor, while his skippers did the cutting at periscope depth. Intelligence from Station HYPO and other code breakers marked the lanes, and Charles A. Lockwood, comms subpack from early 1943, tuned doctrine until it sang. The weapon was the electric Mark-18. The boats were Gato and Balau, and the method was American, a line, brains, steel, and courage, until the enemy's choices shrink to one: lose ships or lose the war. A skipper with a stopwatch and a quiet torpedo is terrifying. A nation that makes 100 such skippers is unstoppable. Nimitz's staff studied every error and fed back every lesson. A boat that fired too deep changed settings by next patrol. A torpedo room that overheated batteries adjusted cooling drills before the next loading. Radar picks, sound bearings, spreadsheet, simple convoy math, nothing fancy, everything relentless. The men behind the desks honored the men behind the periscopes by giving them tools that worked and orders that made sense. By early 1944, the rhythm felt inevitable. Depart. Transit. Strike by day with a wakeless fish. Strike again at night. Refit fast. Repeat. One POW from a sunk oiler told an interrogator, "Your admirals do not guess, they learn." He had watched escorts charge a patch of empty sea while the killer stayed put, still unseen. We could not find the line to follow back. There was no line because batteries and brush springs replaced steam and exhaust. A schoolboy could grasp the lesson. And that was the point: make the complicated thing simple enough to teach, then teach it to thousands. When a nation teaches fast, victories multiply. Nimitz balanced the whole ocean. Carriers took skies. Marines took islands. But the submariners took away time. Without ships moving food and fuel, every Japanese plan aged into failure. Lockwood's motto fit the moment: sink 'em all. But the deeper message belonged to the nation that equipped him to say it. Free minds, fast factories, and fearless crews created a tempo the Axis could not match. The admiral at the top did not need fireworks. He needed discipline and flow, and he got both. He later framed the truth in one line Americans should remember: "We shall never forget that it was our submarines that held the lines while our fleets repaired their wounds." That is, a leadership giving credit where it is due. This is the hinge of the story, the quiet pivot from courage to consequence. A calm Texan, a tireless staff, and a technology you could not see made the Pacific feel smaller to us and endless to them. When the man in charge treats silence as a weapon, the ocean itself begins to speak American. In a brick plant back home, a woman in a bandana talked battery plates to spec, while a machinist trued a gyroscope until it hummed like a tuning fork. Westinghouse wound electric motors. The electric storage battery company stacked cells that could drive a 21-inch Mark-18 at about 29 knots for roughly 4,000 yards. Over 9,000 electric torpedoes rolled out by war's end. Standard parts married to standard drills, so a torpedo man on USS Seahorse or USS Drum could trust the shot. The quiet at sea began as a clatter of presses, lathes and wrenches in towns most maps ignore. Factory whistles set the cadence for combat. The same brush spring you inspected in a classroom at New London was the one under your fingers in the forward room at sea. The same contact pistol you saw at the bench was the one that slammed shut under an enemy's keel. This is how a free economy fights, thousands of small exactnesses forming one massive edge. We did not need mystery. We needed parts that fit, tools that lasted, and manuals that taught 19-year-olds to run a silent thunderbolt like seasoned chiefs. A Japanese petty officer captured after a convoy fight stared at American production figures and muttered, "You build like the tide, always more." He wasn't being poetic. Tankers were going down faster than Japan could replace hulls. The richer the convoy, the more American boats gathered. The Mark-18's weightless run multiplied the fear. Daylight should have been safer. It was just brighter when the hits came. A cruel surprise, written by factories thousands of miles away. Our answer to distance was quantity plus quality. Liberty ships and attack transports carried strength west. Submarine tenders and stateside yards turned around boats in days, not months. Refit crews swapped out bad cells, rewired shaky connectors, fixed what was weak, and sent boats back with the confidence of a new car leaving a lot. The enemy saw only explosions. We saw checklists and talk charts turning into survival. That is the American craft paperwork that saves lives. Industry made generosity possible too. Rations improved on subs. Ice cream machines showed up on some tenders. Mail arrived fast. Men fought better when they felt valued. That is not a small thing. It is the American thing. We built the silence that won the war, and we built a life aboard that honored the men who carried it. The result at sea was not luck. It was logistics with a soul. This is where blueprints become bravery. When a nation can mass-produce precision, the battlefield becomes predictable for us. For the enemy, it becomes a nightmare that renews itself every patrol, every lane, every dawn. The factory whistle back home was the opening note of every Torpedoes song abroad. A yeoman sat at a steel desk in Pearl Harbor with a pencil, a ruler, and a stack of patrol reports that smelled like salt and diesel. He drew lines, added tonnage, and watched the numbers climb into the realm of the unreal. American submarines sank roughly 4.78 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping and about 540,000 tons of warships, over half the enemy's merchant marine erased by less than 2% of our navy. The ship count about 1,314 enemy vessels sent under Reed like a daydream until you remember the names on the covers. Barb, Tang, Wahoo, Trigger, Silversides, Drum. This was economy warfare by craftsmen. One patrol killed a convoy and starved a division 2 months later. A tanker lost off Formosa meant planes that did not fly at Truk. A rice ship cracked in the Yellow Sea meant soldiers who went hungry on New Guinea. The electric, weightless Mark-18 and daylight convoys became coin jars under a hammer. Escorts ran patterns over nothing. The shooter stayed, tracked, and struck again. That is how totals become totals. Repetition plus nerve. A British prisoner rescued after his hellship was sunk told his American lifeguards, "The sea tried to kill us. You pulled us out." That sentence belongs with the ledger because it shows our scale without hiding our soul. We brought fury and rescue in the same hour. We sank enemy ships. We hauled survivors over the side. Power and mercy are not enemies. In the hands of a free people, they are twins. A nation strong enough to destroy was also strong enough to spare. Tokyo's planners watched shipping indexes fall like winter leaves. Hulls lost faster than hulls launched, routes abandoned, warehouses full of goods with no bottoms to carry them. The ministry could draft slogans. It could not draft steel. The empire had hundreds of islands and one ocean to feed them. We made the ocean ours, lane by lane, month by month, until even optimism felt like a lie in the conference rooms. The ledger was not numbers in a vacuum, it was the sound of depth charges fading behind a diving boat. It was a torpedo room, chalkboard wiped clean for another spread. It was a petty officer teaching a new kid how to listen to bearings the way a farmer listens to rain. By late 1944, the arithmetic insulted common sense. Small force, gigantic effect. Say it plain. We broke an empire's back with silence and skill, and the paper trail proves it in ink and tears. Patrol after patrol, the totals bent the curve harder, until even the most cautious staff officer admitted the truth aloud. The merchant marine was not wounded. It was dismantled under schedule by men who treated gunnery tables and bearing books like scripture. When the reports stacked high on a clerk's desk, they were not trophies. They were receipts paid in steel, fuel, and time the enemy would never get back. The bell at Pearl Harbor tolls 52 times for the boats that did not return, and the pier grows very quiet after the last note fades. Those names Growler, Grunion, Harder, Tang, Wahoo, and so many more are a litany Americans should memorize. About 3,506 submariners were lost, the highest casualty rate of any American arm in World War II. The silent service earned its name not as a slogan but as an epitaph. Some boats vanished in a single bright second, some in a long roar under black water, all of them still on patrol in our memory. A captive American officer scratched a line on a mess tin. If we vanish forward. That is the creed you feel when you stand by the memorial wall and trace the hull numbers with a fingertip. The work did not stop. Crews stepped aboard replacement boats with the same calm faces, the same jokes about coffee thick enough to paint a hull, the same understanding that math and courage were on their side. The Mark-18 silence gave them odds. Training gave them craft. Leadership gave them purpose, strong enough to stare into a periscope's small circle and not shake. A Japanese destroyer man told his interrogator, "We feared the ones we could not see most." He meant the quiet shots, yes, but also the American habit of showing up again. Sink a boat and another took its place on the line, damage a hunter and a tender made her right. Morale fed on competence, and competence came from a country that backed words with parts, fuel, and faith. The system cushioned the loss by refusing to slow down. No enemy should be mocked for bravery, and none were. They fought hard, they aimed true, but they were on a clock they could not reset. Every lost tanker shortened every future battle. Every missing freighter stole tomorrows from units still marching today. Our memorials are sad because the price was heavy. They are proud because the purchase changed the war. Courage bought time for the nation to strike smarter and sooner elsewhere. The payoff for sacrifice is measured in the lives not spent later. Fewer invasions, shorter campaigns. Convoys disrupted before fire met fire on beaches. The last bell rings, and the harbour wind smells of salt and oil. The lesson is not tears, it is steel. The line held because Americans refused to let it sag, even when it broke their hearts. They stood the watch until the watch was no longer needed. On eternal patrol is what we say for those boats, and the phrase is more than poetry. It is a promise that their watch keeps meaning. Families kept letters tied with string, shipmates kept traditions at sea, and the fleet kept faith by finishing the job the lost had started. That is how a republic mourns. With tears, with work, and with a vow to make the sacrifice count where it matters most on the outcome. Unroll a 1,945 map of the Pacific, and it looks like someone erased the sea lanes with the flat of a hand. Japan began the war with a merchant fleet measured in millions of gross tons. By the summer of 1945, the usable fraction had collapsed to a stump, roughly 6 million shrinking toward a desperate 1.5 million. Islands that once received weekly cargo saw nothing for months. Factories waited for ore that never came. Air groups sat beside empty fuel tanks. This is not theatre. It is arithmetic applied at periscope depth, one torpedo at a time. On shore, the consequences were plain. Garrisons rationed rice by ounces. Rail depots stacked cargo that would never move. Cities learned to live in brownout because fuel oil leaked into the sea from ships that never reached harbour. None of this happened all at once. It happened one quiet shot at a time, handled by crews who treated precision like religion. The math of freedom is not loud, it is steady, like a diesel turning at watch speed. It wins by inches until the mile gives way. A Korean conscript liberated at war's end said, "Hunger ended when the white star came." That is a human measure of a strategic fact. When a free nation controls movement, it can force choices upon a tyrant until the mask falls. Japan's admirals were competent. Their sailors were brave, but competence cannot invent fuel, and bravery cannot conjure ships. Plans drawn in ink drowned in the sea for lack of tankers to carry the ink forward. Our boats made the maps impossible to plan upon. A convoy route drawn in the morning was a risk by afternoon and a cemetery by night. Planners tried coastal hugging, heavier escorts, even decoys. Wakeless torpedoes cut through the hope. They did not point back to the shooter. They pointed forward to the end of the war. The empire was left with territory it could not connect. An island chain without arteries is just a string of targets, waiting its turn under a periscope's thin cross. The world learned a harsh civics lesson in 1945. Freedom multiplied by industry equals reach. Reach applied with discipline equals control. Control used for liberation equals peace that lasts. You can stand on a pier in Hawaii, feel the breeze, and point to the horizon the submariners owned. The map did not shrink because paper changed. It shrank because Americans made the ocean safe for liberty and unsafe for tyranny, mile by mile, lane by lane. Japanese planners tried arithmetic tricks, smaller convoys, night routes, mixed cargo to squeeze more out of less. The ocean answered with the same calm sentence each time. Movement denied. By August, the calendar itself felt hostile. Every page a new list of shortages that no speech could refill. Gather the numbers that sound impossible and lay them on the table like medals. Submarines were under 2% of US Navy personnel, yet they sank roughly 55% of Japan's merchant tonnage. The total weight of the blow, about 4.78 million tons of merchant ships, plus roughly 540,000 tons of warships, some 1,314 vessels, is the kind of math that should make you sit down. The tool that made the daylight shots disappear. The Mark-18 electric ran at about 29 knots for roughly 4,000 yards, with a warhead of about 600 pounds of torpex, and left no wake at all. Put that in a trained crew's hands, and you get a nation's supply lines collapsing in real time. Could any other country have aligned admirals, workers, and 19-year-old torpedomen this fast, this well, this long? The evidence says no. Chester Nimitz set the tone. Charles Lockwood sharpened the blade. Gato and Balao hulls carried the blade to the fight. Factories wound motors and stacked batteries by the thousands. Tenders refit boats so fast it felt like magic to tired crews. And the crews themselves, calm hands on thin wheels, steady eyes at scopes turned silent weapons into loud consequences. That is not a boast, it is a description, a Japanese officer said after the war. We learned to fear the ocean itself. That is the cleanest summary you will find. Fear did not end the war. American action did. The invisible wake of our torpedoes wrote a visible story in enemy ports. Empty piers, quiet cranes, silent pumps. Civilians felt it as shorter rations. Soldiers felt it as thinner supply. Admirals felt it as plans that died on their desks. The end came not as a single blow, but as a long, tight embrace that took away the enemy's breath. Now, hear the closing chord, because it is not soft. 52 boats were lost and 3,506 submariners with them. The price was paid in full. In return, the nation bought time, saved lives in later battles, and brought an empire to its knees without burning every island to the waterline. The math of freedom looks like this: free minds build, free hands steer, free hearts endure. That is why the flag flew higher after every patrol. Add one last measure to the ledger: enemies rescued from the water who later said the America they met at sea changed the country they imagined on land. Power that chooses mercy is the rarest kind, and it frightened tyrants more than tonnage totals, because it hinted at the world that would replace them. The Pacific became American water not by accident, but by design. Silent shots beneath enemy hulls toppled a war machine that wanted to own whole peoples. We did the opposite. We set them free. That is why the numbers matter. They are not only statistics. They are proof that when Americans decide to protect liberty, even the ocean learns to whisper our name.